I play with a very low sensitivity, really low, super low, like 60 centimeters low. And because of that, I kind of always assumed that faster pads just really weren't for me. But I've been maining a glorious ice pad and some of the hybrid speed pads that are out there, and it's really been working out well. So I wanted to share my experience with them and maybe talk about why you might want to try some of these faster hybrid speed pads that are out. So let's take a look. As I mentioned in the intro, I play at an extremely low sense, and anytime I've tried to use a higher sense, it's never really worked out well for me. I'd be super jittery, I couldn't track things properly, and so I figured I would just stick with what works for me, which has usually been a 3XL desk pad, usually from Glorious, but I've used the Razer ones in the past, and that way it just felt like I could never possibly run out of room on my desk. But because I take a lot of photos or videos of my desk, I have a lot of these really beautiful desk pads from places like Novelkeys or OmniType, but they usually only come out when I'm taking photos and then back into storage they go. But I was looking for a way to sort of freshen up my setup with things I already had laying around, and I decided it was time to start using some of these desk pads. But as beautiful as they are to look at, they aren't exactly built for gaming, which is when I decided to bust out my Glorious Elements Ice Pad. Now, the Elements line by Glorious isn't anything new, and the Ice Pad has been out for almost 2 years now, and I've owned it for those 2 years, but it really hasn't seen a lot of playtime on my desk, and I just thought it was way too fast for me. The Glorious Elements Ice Pad made a lot of waves when it was released, drawing a lot of comparisons to an Artisan Shidenkai, which is a really great pad if you can get your hands on one. The ice is a glass-infused surface that doesn't quite feel like a cloth pad, but doesn't really feel like a hard pad either. It feels pretty rugged, although Glorious does suggest that oils and such from your hands can impair the glide of the pad, or at a minimum, make it look pretty nasty. It comes flat packed, which is nice. It's got about a 4mm thickness, which feels good, and the rubber base stays in place. The build quality is solid on this. But this pad is fast, like really, really fast. Kind of the antithesis of anything I had ever used before. And when deciding to move away from the bigger desk pads and look at the smaller XL sized gaming pads that I really hadn't spent much time with, I thought it would be a good place to start. And I found myself just overall playing a lot better. I had to drop my sense down quite a bit to compensate, but once I got used to it, I was really loving the experience. Slow pads in general have kind of a reputation for being kind of sluggish. And I found that once I dropped my sensitivity quite a bit to compensate, the zero initial friction meant that I was flicking with the best of them, and the softish base kind of gave me a little bit of stopping power that I never really got with pads like the Glorious Helios, or now it's called the Air. Some reviews I've seen said the surface can degrade over time, much like the Artisan Shidenkai. And while Glorious doesn't say that this is specifically intended, over the few months that I've been using it, I really haven't noticed any of this, although I do keep mine pretty clean. The only downside was given that my already low sense having to drop it down even further to compensate for the speed, I found myself running out of room on both my X and Y axis more often than I would have liked. So I was looking for something just a tiny bit slower, which brings me to the Lethal Venus Pro. Now, the Lethal Venus Pro has been living on my desk since it arrived a couple of weeks back. This is one of the fastest pads in Lethal's lineup. It has low friction when starting off, but I was very surprised at the amount of stopping power that this pad had compared to the Ice. I was initially hesitant about this pad. In fact, most of these new hybrid pads I've seen lately being labeled as a speed pad, so I was assuming it was going to be something similar to something like a Glorious Air or a Razer Car, but that's not the case at all. This, along with all the pads I'm looking at today, share a lot more in common with cloth pads, if that makes any sense. You see, they're marketed as fast pads, but they aren't nearly as fast as I was expecting them to be. I went with the Pro variant, which has a softer base that allows for more stopping power by physically pressing into the mat with your mouse. When I first read this sounded weird. I didn't like the idea of mashing my mouse into my desk mat. But I found that's really not how it works. When I go to stop with this pad, I find it's a much more fluid motion, helping me achieve a really great flick accuracy without slowing me down the way a normal cloth pad would. I tried this with glass gates as well, both on a Lamzu Atlantis and a Pulsar X2, and I was surprised to find that it felt noticeably slower than using PTFE feeds. Still really smooth though. The Pro Series only comes in an XL size, 490mm by 410mm, or you can opt for the square version, which is a bit bigger and square, at 500 by 500mm. I might have opted for the larger one simply to have more space, but I opted for the normal XL size instead, and that way I can use my aesthetic desk pads when I'm not gaming, and then when I am gaming, I can just lay the pad on top. But if you can go without the extra soft base, all of Lethal's standard pads in their lineup are actually offered in desk mat and 3XL desk mat sizes, which is something I'm heavily considering with the Venus. I also picked up a Mercury from Lethal. I figured if I liked it, again, I could drop the money on the 3XL pad because this is a part of their standard line. Now, the Mercury is the fastest pad in their lineup. It's marketed as a speed pad, but again, these are still cloth pads, and I feel like they have more in common with cloth pads than they do with any other kind of pad. The surface is a bit rougher than the Venus, but still quite smooth. It does feel pretty similar to a Fanatic Dash or a Glorious Fire, but this feels better in my opinion, smoother really, and has quite a bit more stopping power. This has seen the least amount of playtime for me, as I found myself really enjoying the softer bass on the Venus. Plus, Lethal's standard line does come rolled up as opposed to flat pack, so it took some time to get things smoothed out. The XL in their standard line is the same as their Pro line, 490 by 410mm, and they fit really great sitting on top of my desk mat, even if they do hang a little bit. But the time I've spent with them has been great. I find myself going back and forth between the Venus and the Mercury a lot. They weren't even close to what I was expecting in terms of speed, which has more to do with my perception of these pads rather than their actual specs. The pads that I've looked at from Lethal have been really great, and I like knowing that should I really want to go back to those larger 3XL desk pads, I have that option. And it's really helped me hone my game and seen quite a bit of improvement in my aim lab scores. For now, it's likely that I'll be using the Venus for a while. I might go with the 3XL Mercury if I really can't get away from a 3XL desk pad, but I can say I'm really happy that I decided to sort of go out of my comfort zone and try some other pads. And I'm looking forward to trying even more. I've got some artisan pads on order. I'm absolutely going to be picking up like a sky pad. Those look amazing. There's also a glass pad from Pulsar on its way out. I'm really excited to try those out. So make sure if you like this video to click that subscribe button, and I'll catch you guys in the next video.